Hey guys, today we're in the EPI shop and we're going to show you how to do change of clutches on the Wildcat Trail and Wildcat Sport. On EPI clutch kits, the actual clutch kits themselves are different, and this is a little bit different style clutches than what they use on the 1000 Wildcat. So we'll just run through everything, show you how it works. But again, the clutches themselves, how they come apart, the Wildcat Trail and Wildcat Sport will be the same. Alright, so the first step is, it makes it a little bit easier, it's not required, but if you jack up the rear of the machine, just so the tires are a little bit in there, we didn't do it on this one, but between the Sport and the Trail, sometimes it just gives you more clearance to work on everything. The next step would be remove all these bolts around the outside cover. We've already done that except for this last one here. It's a 30 Torx, you just back it out. Remove your clutch cover. That's going to reveal your clutches. This is going to be your primary clutch, your drive clutch that goes right on your motor. This is going to be your secondary clutch or your driven clutch that's on your transmission. And then of course you got your belt here. One thing on the belt that you're going to want to see, I don't know if you'll be able to see or not, but there's writing on this belt. I'll try to flip it up maybe. But you can read it from left to right. It says Arctic and it says the OEM part number here. Normally that's how you would, if you're putting a new belt on, you want to put it on so you can read it from sitting in this position. If for some reason, if yours is on backwards and you can reuse that belt, you put it on the same way it came off. But most belts are set up so you can run that, or they'll have an arrow go in that direction. Alright, the easiest way I like to take this one apart is we'll start with the secondary clutch because that makes the belt easier to get on and off. And before you take anything apart, what I like to do is, I don't know if you can see on the camera or not, there's an X on this part of the clutch right here. And just put a mark there. There's already kind of one here, and then put one right behind it. That way it just kind of locator and lets you put it back together the same way. So once you get that marked, just back out this bolt. Once you do that, this whole outer half of the clutch will come off. Just got to be careful when you do pull it off. There's washers between the two clutch halves. They could fall out and fall on the ground and roll away, so just pay attention, make sure you don't lose any of them. But just kind of slowly take it off. And then what you'll see is there's the inside of the clutch, these are your rollers. And then here's your helix that's cut into the machine. One thing I'll show you here, and it'll be kind of hard to see, but another way to double check to make sure you got everything aligned right, there's an X on this part of the helix right here, and I'll put another X right there, just so we can see it better. And that's alignment mark for when you put everything back together. Also, when you have it apart, when you pull it apart, there's a couple shims right here for spacing and stuff like that. Make sure when you pull these off, you put them all back on the same way. So set those aside before you lose them, and then that way you pull off your belt without any issues. Set that off to the side, and then just pull your secondary clutch off. And there's your springs inside here. We'll show you how to take that apart. So once you get the secondary clutch off, you're on to removing the primary clutch. And what you want to use is a small bar or something like this, or if you got a really big screwdriver, that'll work too. And what you need to do is you got to keep the clutch from rotating as you're unscrewing the bolt and stuff. So whenever you stick it through, I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but there's a shiny part here that has plastic pieces slide up and down. If you mar that up or dig into it at all, that's going to wreck that plastic button in there when the clutch moves in and out. So you always want to be on the outside of the clutch towers. So just be careful when you stick it through that you're not going to damage anything. And then usually, if you got another person there, they can hang on to it, or if you can find it where it'll hook onto a frame or latch around something. So just got to watch you're not going to hurt any electrical wires or break lines or anything like that. And then this bolt is actually a 60 Torx, so it's kind of a weird bolt, but you just put it in there, and it's normal right hand threads. Just loosen it up. And unthread the bolt. And there's usually on these, there's a little silver washer in there too. But just remove that. Once you get that out, you'll need a clutch puller to get the primary clutch off. It's actually pressed on the end of the crankshaft. So you just thread this in. This is EPI part number PCP-17. It works really good on all the Wildcats. Just thread it in there by hand, and basically what you're going to do is you're going to tighten this up against the crankshaft as it threads in the primary clutch, and it's going to pop it off. Sometimes it makes a really big popping noise, and sometimes it just slides off nice and quiet. If it gets really hard and crazy tight and it feels like you're going to break something, you just want to stop right there, and then you can give it a light tap with the end of the hammer right on the square edge of this, but you don't want to pound on it. Just give it a little tap, and sometimes that extra vibration will make it come off if needed. Try not to do that unless you have to. But then it's just a matter, you're going to turn the clutch the other direction now, so you're going to have to reset your bar in a different area, or at least come from the different direction. And that'll stay there. And these are torqued on there pretty good, so you usually want to use like a breaker bar on them. So it kind of locks itself in there. Just keep cranking on it. Puller makes, or the bar made a lot of noise, but you've seen that little pop come off. That's typical, and that's normal what you'd see. And then your clutch is loose, your puller sticking through, and you just pull this off. Alright, so now we're going to show you how to remove the secondary spring out of the clutch. This is our CCT 510 clutch compression tool. You can use it on a vise like this or on the side of the bench, whatever works easiest for you. And basically what we got to do is we just got to remove these bolts here. And what I like to do first is I like to break them loose. You don't want to unscrew them all the way, but just kind of take the first turn or so out of them. Just makes it a little bit easier once you get in the tool. Once you do that, you just set it down in here. Slide that adapter down. Thread your nut all the way down. And then once you get to this point, you don't want to super crank down hard on it. You just want to just put a little bit of pressure on it, because this is a thin metal plate and you can bend that if you crank it down too hard. So you just want a little tension on it. You just want to remove these 6 bolts or 5 bolts. If you use a impact, you got to be really careful. This is a number 30 Torx. They do strip out easy, so just be careful with that part of it. Pull those out, set them aside. Once you get that done, it's just a matter of just unthreading this, and it'll let the spring come up slowly and safely. Once you get that nut off, then you can actually pull. This is actually a 2-piece cup and plate here. Just you can keep them together. They will move around in there. That's normal. And then here, that'll reveal your spring. Pull your spring out, and then that's the removal process. Then put it back together is pretty much the same thing, just opposite. You just put your spring back in. I don't know if the camera will see it or not, but it's not always fully level in here, and depending on your spring, they might not sit totally flat. So I like to set the spring in there and just make sure it's not off to one side or another, and just make sure it sits as level as you can get it. Then once you do that, plug your cup and your plate back on. Get the holes kind of halfway lined up with the clutch. And you just tighten this back down. And slowly crank her down. And before you get all the way down to the bottom, You want to get it close, but you don't want to crank down tight on it because you'll have to move it around to get these holes to line up. This one actually lined up pretty close, as you can see in there. But usually once you get one started, then you can pivot around and get the other one started. I like to start all the bolts in there before I fully tighten them down. If you've had your clutch apart a couple times, it's not a bad idea to use blue Loctite on these. Usually if it's just once or twice, usually we haven't seen an issue yet with them. So again, that's just a torque bolt, or head, so you don't want to crank it really hard on it. Once you get some of them slightly down there, you can crank this down a little bit tighter. But again, just be careful you don't go too far and bend that plate. And tighten them up. Once that's done, that'll hold the spring and everything down in there. Let's back this nut off one more time. Your clutch is almost done. What I always do is I always just take and hand check them. I got one loose one on here, just trying to speed up for the video, and then once you get to this point, it's a good time to clean your clutches. Once you know that these are all tight, you can do this while the spring's out of there too, so that way you can clean inside if you want to. Take an air hose, blow everything out really good, and then what you want to do is start on the outside with like a scotch pad like this, or real light sandpaper, emery cloth. You just start it from the outside and go in, and you just keep going back and forth all the way up and down. A lot of times those will get really bright and shiny and glossy. That's a belt glazing. You just want to get that off. Once you go around a couple times with the sanding it, again, you don't want to leave deep scratches, and you just want to kind of clean and buff it off. And just take some brake cleaner, spray it on a rag like that, and wipe it down, and that'll clean everything up for you. This one's pretty clean because it's pretty much new. And that'll get you done with the secondary clutch. You set that aside and we'll start working on the primary. Alright, so next we got the primary clutch, and what we want to do here again is just, I always like to mark things, so especially on the primary clutch, because it is balanced, so you want to get it back together the right way. There is an X stamp on this one and in here, but I always just hand mark them just to make sure, easier, quicker to do it. So put an X on there. Once you got that, we're using again the clutch compression tool, the CCT 510, and this one's a little bit snug fit on here. You just gently get her down on there. It'll slide down like that. Tighten down the adapter. And on this one, what you want to do is once you start feeling the spring tension, you just want to go a little bit farther down. You don't have to go crazy on it. It'll move up and down about an inch or so. Just enough so it's holding the spring tension. Then you want to remove this. Just remove all those other. You can see the clutch will move up and down now. Just remember, this is under spring tension, so if you're not holding a holding tool, you can't just pull them out like that because it'll come flying up at you. The other thing you want to do is, we'll show you in a second, there's a bushing inside this plate. So when you take this on and off, this tool does it really nice and good for you to hold it straight so you don't damage this bushing. But we'll pull this out of here. Alright, so get cover plate off, and on this plate there's a bushing. This is a bushing right here. And when you're taking this off, if you're doing it by hand, you got to have somebody help hold it down somehow or another. So when somebody's taking out, another person's taking out the bolts, you let this come up slowly and evenly. If it gets caught one way or another, you'll damage this bushing on the shaft, and it could cause you issues down the road. Same thing when you go and install it, make sure it's nice and level, otherwise you'll damage that. But pretty much pull that off, your spring will come right out then, and then there's no tension on the rest of the stuff. To change the weights, what you need to do is there's an Allen wrench head here and a 3/8 wrench here, and we'll remove the weight. On this one, it's got the stock weights in there. We'll show you the difference between the stock weights and the EPI weights. Pull that nut off, and then the pin should just slide right through. Now when you pull this out, there's going to be 2 little shims in here. It might stay in the clutch, it might stick to the weight. But here's your weight. Put that there for right now. And you have 2 little shims like this, one on each side. Just want to make sure you keep track of those, and they need to go back in there. When you do that, this is what the stock weight looks like. EPI spent a lot of time in development. We built a weight that has a lot different profile, a lot different shape to it, as you can see between the two. But they go in and out, whether you're changing ours or the stock ones, the same process. So we'll put the stock one back in. What you want to do is stick your bolt just so it's starting to go through there, and then your other shim here, just start that on there so it just stays in place. And then you slide your weight in there to make sure that you don't knock that shim out. And it takes sometimes a little time and patience. It helps to spin this bolt as you're doing this. But then you got to line this shim up in there and then push it on through. That way, that time went pretty easy. Sometimes you'll sit there and you'll want to cuss and swear at it a few times, and it'll take a little time, but you can get it done. And then you just tighten it back up. And you're good to go. Now since the spring is in here, you can move the clutch back and forth really good. Now is a good time. Get it back off of here. You take an air hose, blow it out really good, move it back and forth. You know, blow out in here first. Blow all this area out. Check this one's got a 2-way bearing in it, so it should turn both directions. If it doesn't, that means that bearing's starting to stick and you might need to replace that. And that'll cause you a lot of belt issues if you don't. But blow it all out. Again, just like the secondary clutch, start on the outside and sand or polish it off in it, you know, going back and forth that way. And then wipe it clean with a brake cleaner. And then blow it all out when you're done. Make sure your hands are always as clean as they can be. Then we'll show you how to put the spring back in. Pretty much the opposite of what was in there. Put the spring in here. Again, make sure it seats on this side and also on the cover plate. Usually they should bolt right in. Sometimes you might need to push on them, and they'll you'll hear them snap and pop into place. And then make sure you got your X's lined up here and here. And again, if you don't have the tool, just make sure you're pushing this down nice and square to prevent the bushing damage. And then just tighten it up. Usually once you get close, you can just kind of lift it up to match up, line up the holes. Just put all these bolts in. And you don't want a super torque on these because this is an aluminum clutch. You can strip them out. Once you're done with that, just unthread it. want to just make sure that these are tight where you need them. So now we're going to put everything back together. We're going to throw the primary clutch on first. Take a paper towel, clean off this clutch taper here, or the taper in the back of the clutch, and also on your motor. And then just slide it on nice and square. Slide on like that, grab your clutch bolt. Make sure you got this little silver washer on here. And then thread it in. Again, this is a 60 Torx. And then you'll have to stick your bar in there to keep it from rotating. So again, make sure you don't damage any of this part where the clutch is sliding up and down in. Once you get this in place, this one gets torqued to 60 foot-pounds. Hold the bar in place, and usually once you get a little tension on it, it'll stay. To 60. We're good there. Once you got that on, then you slide on the primary clutch, or the secondary clutch. Slide this on. Sometimes if it doesn't pop all the way in place, you might need to put it in a different gear, and that'll allow you to, this shaft not to spin as much, and pops it on you a little bit easier. Grab your other half of your clutch, have that ready, but before you do that, you need to throw on your belt. Again, make sure that your arrows are going the right direction, or however you took it off, it goes back on the same way. Just loop it around the primary clutch and loop it on there, get it close lined up. Then the 4 shims, this one had 4, it'll vary depending on the models and years and stuff. But make sure those go back in place. And then once you have that, remember that the X's that we marked here and here, there's also the X here. What you're going to do is you're going to slide these rollers into the cut of that helix right there. So you just got to line up so they're lined up, or line them up so they go in line with each other and your X's are close. Once you do that, you might have to wiggle the belt up and down a little bit to get it started too. And then see how the shaft is sticking way in there. As you lift up on that belt and move the belt around, or even spin it, it'll allow you to get that farther down there. You only get it to a certain point normally, and then you have to put the bolt in. And as you tighten this up, it'll force the belt out and do it. But if you hit it real hard with an impact, it'll actually pinch the belt right in there, and it might hang that up and not tighten up properly. So what I like to do is I like to turn a little bit and then spin the clutches. I got this in neutral so it'll move around. And as you do that, you'll see the belt will get tighter and it'll stick out farther from the clutches. Just keep kind of working that back and forth. And then you torque that down. I believe it's 60 foot-pounds. It'll say in our instructions on where to torque it to on the secondary. But you torque that to factory spec. Alright, so the only thing left now is throw your clutch cover back on. Just make sure your clutch gasket's good all the way around. Most time you can reuse them unless it's been sealed with silicone, or you ripped it, or blew a belt or something. Sometimes they'll damage it, but otherwise you should be able to pull it back or put it back on, and then just put your clutch cover bolts back in. And just repeat that process for all of them all the way around. Put that one in there just to hold it on, but put those in and then you're good to go.